Hi, everybody. You're very welcome this morning. I think we might get started. I'm going to just run through a little bit of housekeeping. Um, the webinar this morning is being recorded. All attendees are muted with their cameras off. If you have a question for our panel, you can submit by clicking the Q&A tab, which is on the top of your screen. The recording and slides will be distributed by email after the webinar. An FAQ document with key questions asked during the webinar will be distributed as well. And finally, we'd love to know what you think of this webinar. So if you'd like to give us your thoughts on the event, you can complete a short online survey, which is pinned to the top of the Q&A tab. And with that, I think I'm going to hand over now to Jim Shear, Head of SEAI's Data and Insights Department. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Nicole, and thanks very much for welcoming everybody. And I'd like to pass on my own welcome to our annual pre-Christmas presentation of Energy in Ireland, presenting to you the latest definitive data on energy supply, energy demand, and related greenhouse gas emissions. As usual, today will be packed with data and insights collected and curated by the SEAI Energy Statistics team, many of whom you'll meet today, led by our Head of Energy Statistics, Dr. Lee Carroll. I'm here to offer a few words of introduction and perspective before handing over to the SEAI Statistics team. I'm not going to try to sum up the wealth of information you'll be presented with today in this short introduction, and it's safe to say that there'll be something in today's presentation for everyone with an interest in the transition of Ireland's energy system away from fossil fuels. We're coming to you at yet another critical point when it comes to meeting our legally binding climate obligations. We're at the end of our first carbon budget and halfway through the 10-year period over which we are to halve our 2018 national emissions by 2030. And today you're going to get the latest report card on our progress with this challenge from the energy perspective. Without spoiling the whole story, whilst we've made a lot of great progress and generated a lot of momentum on our transition to a sustainable energy system for Ireland, particularly with the electricity sector, with home retrofits, with business and industry decarbonisation, transition to electric vehicles and increased community action and many other areas, as with previous years, the changes we are making are not yet at the scale or depth to claim to be on a trajectory to success. And this is what you'll see in the data today. Per previous years, our call to action is for a redoubling of effort to cause both an unprecedented level of renewable energy rollout, utilising the technologies we know work like wind and solar and interconnection and smart grid developments, combined with demand-side technologies to improve energy efficiency across all sectors of our society and economy. In short, we need to accelerate all of the actions outlined in Ireland's Climate Action Plan, committing increased human and financial resources to that cause. But more than that, and with increasing clarity, we're seeing in the data that a technology-based approach to an energy system transformation on its own won't be enough. Whilst we need to serve a growing population and government priorities for economic growth and development, the influence of these factors on our energy system must now more than ever be contextualized and made compatible with our climate obligations. Watch today in particular for data on energy demand across the course of the presentations, and the more we can limit our demand increases, the less expensive our energy systems will be to develop, so reducing upward pressure on consumer prices and cost of living pressures while increasing business competitiveness. Lower energy demand systems are also less complex and more secure. Less demand means less imported fossil fuels, reducing our exposure to international price fluctuations. And the faster we reduce demand through improving building fabric and transport emissions, the warmer our homes will be, the cleaner our air, unlocking health benefits across society, and tackling issues like fuel poverty and increased winter mortality for those that are most vulnerable. Those on the call contributing to the challenge of seeking to deliver an energy system that supports a thriving society without breaking our share of planetary boundaries will find the data they need to construct their arguments and propose solutions in today's treasure trove of presentations and via our web resources where all of the data that you'll see presented today can be accessed. So please take a sip of your tea or coffee, and I invite you to engage with us across this morning's presentations. Consider your questions for us, utilize the question and answer function, and we have a team of analysts in the background prepared to provide the best answers we can to support you, to help us to find solutions as we face our energy system transformation. So with the perspective covered by me just now, I'm going to hand to Lee Carroll shortly, who will present to you on the past, Cathal O'Clery on the present. After that, Emma Lynch on projections, Hannah Julian on people, Mary Holland on prices, Niall Delaney on places, Emily Byrne on panels, and partnerships with Joel Franklin then to round us out before we have a question and answer session. So with that, I'd now like to hand to our Head of Energy Statistics, Dr. Lee Carroll. Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for that introduction and that high-level perspective. I seem just waiting. Nicole, can you reshare the presentation, please?
Yep, it's just there. Can you see it there? Are you able to see it?
Unfortunately not. No, I could see it when Jim was presenting, but it's gone off my screen now.
Let me look after that. Okay, do you see it there?
I'm clicking the take control button. It says the content can't be displayed.
Oh, okay, hang on 1 sec. I'll just share it again, that's okay.
So apologies, those in the call, it's a new technology platform.
It's coming up now, I think. Can you see that there?
I can, yeah. So I'm going to click, that's it, perfect, that's great. So I'm just going to speed through Jim's slides. Apologies for that, everybody on the call. So again, thanks for that big picture context, Jim. I'm Lee Carroll. I head up the energy statistics team in SEAI that publishes the Energy in Ireland reports. Published every year for over 20 years now, it's grown into a hefty annual publication. And these days it's almost 250 pages long. But I always do take the chance to tell people that its real value of the report comes from its breadth, not its depth. Unlike other national reports out there that focus on a particular energy type or economic sector, the Energy in Ireland report works to cover all energy products and all fuels used across the entire economy. What makes it unique is how inclusive it is. It really does aim to capture everything equally without any bias or favoritism to a particular fuel or sector. But its amazing breadth makes it an absolute nightmare to summarize in a short presentation like today. And I really have zero chance of covering everything. And I'm bound to leave somebody unhappy in how I summarize things. The best I can do is something like a chef's choice. I've picked out what I think are the most interesting and important data and insights from the reports. And I hope that'll be enough to whet your appetite and to tempt you into reading the report itself, or at least cracking it open and having a look at some of the really interesting and cool plots that are inside it. So over on the stats team in SEAI, we like to think that the Energy in Ireland launch is important every year. But as Jim has touched on, we really do feel that it's particularly true in the case of the 2025 release, because it comes at such a key moment in Ireland's energy transition. We're now just 2 weeks away from the closeout of 2025, which marks the end of Ireland's first ever carbon budget. And that's a real landmark in our climate policy. And we stand at the precise midpoint of the critical 2020 to 2030 decade in which Ireland has committed to halving its total greenhouse gas emissions. And from the end of 2025, Ireland has 5 years left to reduce its national energy demand by about 15% under the EU's Energy Efficiency Directive. Now, delivering on these three joined up targets, it's essential. They're like pacemakers in a race for Ireland. They remind us and guide us on how fast we need to be going if we're to be pulling our weight on keeping global temperatures in check. They ensure that every sector and every community in our economy is engaged and accountable when it comes to driving Ireland's energy transition forward. But at the very same time, we shouldn't lose sight of what our targets are guiding us towards. We shouldn't miss the wood for the trees, if you like. It's really not targets for the sake of targets. There are many, many tangible economic and social benefits to delivering Ireland's energy transition, and Jim has mentioned a few. Warmer homes, cleaner air, improved public transport, more active citizens, and more competitive businesses. And these are the real goals that sit behind our targets. They're really where we want Ireland to be in the future. And given that we're sitting at that special moment in time at the end of 2025, I think it's really useful to take a moment to look at our long-term and medium-term progress to date before we jump into looking at year-to-year changes in our most recent data. And when I want a shot in the arm, when I need to be optimistic about decarbonising Ireland's energy, I look at this plot, because it shows that Ireland's national energy-related emissions in 2024 are a third lower than their peak in 2005. And that's despite Ireland's population increasing by 30% across that period and us having 49% more private cars on the roads. And we don't even need to go back 20 years to see very substantial progress. Since 2018, the baseline year that sets our carbon budgets and our 2030 emission targets, we've seen a 16% reduction in energy-related emissions. And this highlights that Ireland can and has delivered double-digit reductions in its emissions, despite significant shifts in demographics and demands. So a plot like this reminds me, when I need that reminding, of what has been possible in the past and what is possible again going forward. Really, what the data is telling us now is that we need to double down on our recent emission reductions, and I mean that quite literally. A 16% reduction in energy-related emissions since 2018 only equates to an annual average reduction rate of about 2.7%, whereas we need to see a consistent annual reduction much closer and exceeding 5% to align to our emission reduction obligations. To get there, we need to do more of what is already working, increasing the rollout of wind and solar PV generation, looking at more home energy upgrades, more heat pumps and more electric vehicles, while also pursuing new approaches that we know will work if they're given a chance. Things like scaling district heating networks, implementing Ireland's new renewable heat obligation scheme, and strengthening grid and energy storage infrastructure. But coming back to the data, from what needs to happen to what actually has happened, let's look now at how Ireland's energy-related emissions in 2024 are 16% lower than those in 2018. Well, if we break out our total energy-related emissions into the components or sectors of electricity, heating, and transport, then we see that emissions from all three components have gone down since 2018, but not equally. The biggest decreases come from electricity. These emissions in 2024 are down 32% on the level in 2018, and that's despite electricity demand growing by 18% in that period. On the other hand, transport emissions in 2024 are just 5.3% lower than in 2018. And in that period, we've had COVID impacts on travel, record levels of biofuel blending into our diesel and petrol, and record levels of EV uptake. Here, the data is telling us that the increases in demand for transport fuels are eroding some of the progress we're making in decarbonising those transport fuels. The transport fuels we're using, they are less carbon intense now than they were, but we're using more of them. So we're not seeing all the emission benefit we might if we were managing transport demand more effectively. This donut plot shows the high-level split of energy-related emissions in 2024 across the three energy components. If you'd looked at this plot a decade ago, then you'd have seen a split that was much closer to a third, a third, and a third. But after consistent drops in electricity emissions, we're now seeing something much more like 1/5 for electricity and 2/5 each for transport and heat. Really, in the long, medium, and short term, it's been the drop in electricity emissions that has been a key driver in reducing our energy-related overall emissions. But that begs the question, how exactly is it that Ireland has consistently reduced electricity emissions while our demand for electricity has in parallel consistently increased? Well, to put it simply, Ireland's electricity emissions have gone down because we've been using less fossil fuels for electricity generation. It's kind of as simple as that. And on top of that reduction in fossil fuel quantity, there's been a move away from the most carbon intense fossil fuels like coal and peat. Electricity generation from fossil fuels was down 3.1% in 2024. And in contrast, renewable electricity generation went up, albeit slowly. It was up 1.6% in 2024. And it's important to note that the overall electricity generation in Ireland was actually down in 2024, down by 1%. We generated less electricity indigenously within our national borders, and that's despite Ireland's electricity supply needing to increase by 4% to keep pace with increased electricity demand across the country. Ireland has continued to make increased use of net imports of electricity across international interconnectors to satisfy its electricity demand in 2024. Ireland's use of net imports of electricity last year were up over 50% on 2023 levels and set a new record high for electricity imports. And because we've used less fossil fuels and less carbon intense fossil fuels for electricity generation through the use of more net imports and more renewables on the grid, Ireland's electricity emissions have fallen in every single year of the first carbon budget. Official data from the EPA shows that electricity sector emitted 34.1 megatons of CO2 equivalent in the first 4 years of the first carbon budget. and that leaves 5.9 megatons of allowable emissions left in 2025 from its 40 megaton sectoral emission ceiling. So I'm going to leave you in suspense on the 2025 results for just a few minutes, but Cathal will soon put us out of our misery. In his presentation, he's going to show how he's leveraged monthly data from 2025 to make a strong provisional estimate on both the electricity and transport sectors and to understand how they will close out their first carbon budget. With that cliffhanger, I'll move on to looking at the origin of our emissions. So they say there's no smoke without fire, and there's no energy-related emissions without energy use. This donut plot is a breakdown of Ireland's energy requirement in 2024. It's the combustion of the fossil fuels in this plot that essentially gives rise to our energy-related emissions. And the first thing to note is just how fossil-dominated our national energy supply still is. Just over 81% of all energy used in Ireland is a fossil fuel. Just under half of our energy comes from oil products, all of which are imported, followed by 30% from gas, about 80% of which is imported. So in addition to being highly fossil dependent, our energy supply remains highly import dependent as well. Looking at how the energy supply has changed in 2024 from 2023, we can see quite a bit of underlying movement behind the overall increase of 2.6%. Ireland required more oil, more electricity imports, more gas, and more renewables in 2024, but less coal, peat, and non-renewable wastes. And I draw your attention to the fact that the annual increases we saw in 2024 for oil, gas, and imported electricity were all higher than the annual increase in renewable energy. And this shows that the increase in Ireland's energy demand is still being substantially serviced by non-renewable energy sources. Let's zoom in on that increase in renewable energy supply in 2024 for just a second. It was up 5.6% on 2023 levels, and it set a new record of 24.5 terawatt hours of renewable energy in Ireland's national energy mix. This donut shows the breakdown of that 24.5 terawatt hours of renewable energy across the full national portfolio of renewable technologies. And you can see that wind is still a big part of that portfolio, accounting for just under half of our renewable energy. In second and third place are biodiesel and biomass, and summed together, these top three sources accounted for just under 3/4 of all of Ireland's renewable energy supply last year. In fifth and sixth place are solar PV and the renewable ambient heat captured by the national fleet of heat pumps. And summed together, these new and fast-growing technologies accounted for 9.4% of our renewable supply in 2024. And it's really interesting to note, at least I think it is, that Ireland got more renewable energy from sunshine than from rainfall in 2024, by which I mean we have more renewable energy coming from solar PV than from hydro generation. And that's going to be the new normal going forward. We've seen very significant increases in solar PV in recent years, whereas hydro was relatively constant in the long term. Solar PV was up over 69% in 2024. And recent increases have been driven by a step change increase in the connection of utility scale solar farms to the national grid ever since late 2022, coupled with near exponential increases in embedded rooftop solar PV on homes, businesses, and farms. So having looked briefly at renewable energy supply for just a few minutes, let's move now to our renewable energy targets, specifically those set out under the EU's Renewable Energy Directive. This plot shows Ireland's overall renewable energy share and how that's changed over time. And it's really a measure of just how much renewable energy is in our system. The overall RES result for 2024 was 16.1%, the highest we've ever achieved to date. It's up from 15.2% in 2023 and is now, for the very first time outside the use of statistical transfers, above our baseline 2020 target of 16%. But despite setting a personal best in 2024, our RES overall result remains significantly below the indicative trajectory needed to reach our binding target of 43% in 2030. Really, to be on trajectory in 2024, our RES overall result would need to be much closer to 25% than its current 16%. This plot here shows another key metric under the EU's Renewable Energy Directive. It's our renewable energy share in electricity, or our RESI result. Increasing the renewable share of our electricity is a key pillar to achieving our overall RES results. In 2024, our renewable energy share in electricity was 41.3%, again setting another personal best for Ireland. but it remains just over half of the 80% target we've set ourselves for 2030, and that we need to help uplift the overall RES results to 43% by 2030. So just like in our energy-related emissions, we're seeing positive progress in our renewable energy supply. We're setting multiple personal bests in our renewable energy supply and against our EU metrics, but we need to see a doubling down of current levels of progress in order to succeed against those 2030 targets. There's so much I want to cover and there's so little time left on the clock. We've looked very briefly now at energy related emissions and energy supply. So I'm just going to take a few moments to look at a few key sources of energy demand. And I'll start with electricity demand, which accounts for 22.9% of the total energy demand in the country and has grown pretty steadily for the last 10 years. A key driver, or perhaps the key driver of that increase has been electricity demand coming from Ireland's data centres. Data published by the CSO showed that data centres accounted for just over 21% of Ireland's electricity demand in 2024, and that's up 10% on the previous year. In contrast, outside of data centre demand, the net electricity demand from all other sectors of the Irish economy combined has been quite constant. That's shown here by the pink line in this plot. The sum of non-data centre electricity demand in Ireland has varied by less than plus or minus 3% over the last 9 years. If you compare annual electricity demand in 2015 to electricity demand in 2024, then we can see that data centres are responsible for over 88% of the increase in Ireland's annual electricity demand. And in my last 60 seconds, let's hit the accelerator even harder for a fast and furious look at Ireland's transport energy demand, noting that it remains fossil fuel dominated, with 93% of transport energy demand satisfied using liquid fossil fuels like diesel, jet kerosene, gasoline, or petrol. Private cars remain the leading source of transport energy demand in 2024 by a wide margin, followed by international aviation and then heavy good vehicles for road freight. And it's always interesting to me to note that we put more fuel into the planes in our skies than we do into the trucks and lorries on our roads. 21.5% of transport energy demand comes from flights in and out of Ireland. It's also interesting to note that not only was the energy demand from private cars and HGVs both up in 2024, but their 2024 energy demands are both now higher than in 2019, indicating a more than full rebound from COVID impacts. So thanks for your attention and apologies for the breakneck pace of the delivery at the end there. There really is so much more wonderful data in the report than I could ever hope to share in this short overview. And as Jim said, we really do hope that you make the report part of your Christmas reading list. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Cathal, who will present on our very latest data, hot off the press. So that's over to you now, Cathal.
Thank you, Lee. I just take control of the slides. And good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Cathal O'Cleric, and I'm a senior energy analyst on the energy statistics team at SEAI. Lee has covered some of the definitive annual statistics up to the end of 2024, and I will present some of the monthly data we have from 2025 and look at some of the recent trends in energy supply and demand. So SEAI compiles and reports monthly quantities of electricity, gas, and oil that are supplied within Ireland, along with some additional breakdowns, which we'll get into now. Ireland is required to report this data under the EU Energy Statistics Regulation, and these three data sets provide visibility on around 92% of Ireland's annual final energy consumption. The data is available on the SEAI website at the link provided. And in this presentation, as in the report, I will mostly present data up to the end of September 2025, although electricity and gas data for October are already available on the website. So these three data sets can be used to inform early analysis of energy supply and demand in each of the three modes, as mentioned by Lee earlier. So electricity, heat, and transport. They can also be used to provide an early indication of emissions, specifically in the electricity and transport sectors. So as Lee mentioned, 2025 marks the end of Ireland's first carbon budget period. So I think it'd be appropriate that we begin by looking at emissions. And in this case, we'll look at the electricity cap sector emissions. So based on the monthly data we've collected, based on the monthly data we collected, as well as more detailed annual data from SEAI and the EPA, we can make a provisional extrapolation of Ireland's electricity emissions to the end of 2025. And we estimate emissions of 6.5 megatons of CO2 equivalent from the electricity cap sector in 2025, which would be a decrease of approximately 6% on the 2024 levels. Despite this reduction, this would equate to, or would mean that the electricity exceeded its 5-year sectoral emission ceiling by around 1.5% or 0.6 of a megaton of CO2 equivalent. So now we'll look a bit deeper into the recent trends within electricity supply and generation. So, as we mentioned earlier, there has been growth year on year in electricity demand, and this graph here shows the monthly utility scale supply. So that's electricity that's supplied into the grid from generators in Ireland, as well as the net import of electricity. The red line shows a rolling 12-month average of supply, and the upward trend is evident for the last 10 years. This 12-month average supply has increased by around 3.3% in the 12 months from September 2024 to September 2025. In other words, there's approximately a 3.3% annual increase in supply and consumption of electricity through the grid. This is typical of the rate of annual increase we've seen in recent years, although it's slightly below the increase that was seen in calendar year 2024. So it's not just the quantity of electricity supplied and consumed that is changing, it's also the sources of that electricity, as Lee has already touched on. This chart shows the monthly import and export of electricity. So that is the physical flow of electricity across the state's borders. In 2023, 24, and 25, we've seen consistently low electricity exports from Ireland and consistently high electricity imports to Ireland, with net imports increasing again in 2025. This slide shows the flow of imports and exports split into the three interconnectors. The first is the east-west interconnector between Dublin and North Wales. The second is the north-south connection, which is an aggregate of the four circuits that connect Ireland and Northern Ireland. And on the right is the new Greenlink interconnector between Wexford and Wales. The new Greenlink interconnector began commercial operations at the end of January 2025 and is delivering approximately the same level of net imports as the two other connections combined. So from January to September this year, 46% of Ireland's net imports of electricity flowed across the Greenlink interconnector, with the remaining flowing across the north-south and east-west connections. So another recent change in electricity supply is from solar PV, as Lee has already touched on. This chart shows the monthly output from utility scale solar PV, or in other words, solar farms. As can be seen, the first production from solar farms was recorded in August 2022 and has risen significantly over the last number of years. In the first 9 months of 2025, solar farms had already produced almost 1 terawatt hour of electricity, comparing that with 0.73 terawatt hours in 2024. So it can be useful to step back and look at the overall changes in the electricity supply. And in this case, we'll compare the first 9 months of 2025 to the first 9 months of 2024. And this slide here will show a waterfall plot of the changes. We can see that the net imports of electricity increased by almost 15%, followed by the changes in renewables. So renewables increased by 2.6% or 0.26 terawatt hours, with increases in solar and wind both offsetting a decrease in hydro output. And then the non-renewable or fossil generation decreased by around 1.1%. There was a significant decrease in coal generation, with ESB ending the generation of electricity from coal at money point from the end of June this year. This resulted in an overall increase in utility scale supply of almost 3% when comparing the two 9-month periods. And with that quick look at the latest electricity data, we'll move on to the transport sector. So similar to the electricity sector, SEAI has used the monthly and annual data to make a provisional extrapolation of Ireland's transport emissions to the end of 2025. This estimate indicates 11.5 megatons of CO2 equivalent for 2025, a 2% decrease on 2024. This would mean that the transport sector will exceed or overshoot its 5-year sectoral emissions ceiling by around 7% or 3.8 megatons. Despite this relatively modest decrease in emissions, it can be useful to look at what is changing in transport and causing this reduction. So one trend that can be seen in the monthly data is the increased biofuel content of road fuels. We can see here that in 2025, the biofuel content of both road diesel and road petrol has increased by about 0.5 percentage points. And another trend that is feeding into this slight decrease in transport emissions is the total demand for road diesel and road petrol. So this is including the fossil and biofuel components of each. So this chart shows the monthly demand. It's referred to as deliveries of these fuels into the Irish market. And the blue line shows the total 12-month moving point average of these deliveries. And in the center of the chart, you can see the impact of COVID on monthly deliveries. It'll also be visible in some of the other plots I show later on. I won't comment on it on every time we see it. I think we've all probably had enough talking about COVID for the moment. So, but from what we can see from this moving point average, the blue line, between September 2024 and September 2025, there's been around a 1% decrease in the average deliveries. In other words, a very slight decrease in demand. And it should be noted that these figures are provisional and can occasionally be amended if suppliers provide updated data at the end of the year. But it is of note that the increase that we've seen since the end of COVID has seemed to have flattened out slightly in the last year or so. Another key trend in transport, although it is not included or has very little impact on the transport cap sector, is international aviation. So this chart shows monthly jet kerosene demand, almost all of which is used in international aviation. So jet kerosene demand was relatively unchanged in 2024 compared to 2023, but based on monthly data from January to September this year, it's apparent that jet kerosene demand is higher in 2025, and we estimate that it is approximately 5% higher. And again, if this is confirmed in the annual data, then the annual aviation demand has reached a new record high in 2025. So finally, I'd like to touch on the heat demand and specifically what the monthly data can tell us about trends in the heat demand in the residential sector. On the left, you can see the monthly residential natural gas demand. And unlike the other time series I've shown up to now, this data actually extends to November 2025. I just thought it was worth updating this one in particular because it captures more of the heating season. And on the right is the monthly demand for heating kerosene, approximately 95% of which is used in the residential sector. Both of these time series indicate a reduction in residential heating fuel demand in 2025. However, it should be noted because of the highly seasonal nature of heat demand that the total annual quantities for 2025 will be significantly affected by the remaining consumption this year. So kerosene consumption in November and December. So I hope I've been able to provide some useful information from the monthly energy statistics, and I'd like to now pass you over to my colleague Emma Lynch, head of SEAI's modelling team, to look at projections of Ireland's future energy supply and use. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Good morning, everyone. Nicole, the presentation has just disappeared from me as well there.
Okay, let me bring it back on. Can you see it there?
Yep.
Great. So you can just take control there.
Great.
Nice.
Great. Yeah, so good morning. I'm Emma Lynch. I head up the energy modeling team in SEAI. So today I'm just going to pull out a couple of the select insights from our National Energy Projections report, which was published earlier this year. So some of the kind of the background historical data will be a little bit different to what you're seeing today as it was published earlier this year, but aligns to what was published by the EPA in the emissions projections in May. So SEAI's national energy projections are modeled using the National Energy Modelling Framework. So it's a model of Ireland's energy system developed and maintained by SEAI. And the national energy projections are used to assess policies and measures and their potential to lead to the achievement of Ireland's national and EU energy and climate obligations. Annually, we produce a report. The section I'm going to talk about today will speak to results from the projections produced in 2025. But there is currently a new cycle underway, and updated data from that modeling will be available in the spring of 2026. So just a pitch there for after you're finished reading Energy in Ireland, you can pick up the National Energy Projections report, and there's some newly published plots and data for you to explore there as well. So just to talk about the timeline, so Lee and Cathal have gone through the domain of the Energy in Ireland report, looking at Ireland's measured past and the present and kind of latest and greatest data on energy in Ireland. The projections takes that forward and looks at potential scenarios, really policy-rich scenarios focused on the kind of the short to medium term. We do project out to 2055, so we're looking out to the long term as well. But the focus of the projections report is really around that kind of short to 2030 to 2040, short to medium term. That's really just because the kind of the current focus of policy, where we see a lot of the specific targets that are being set, that's where that focus lies on that time horizon. There's really more policy detail that's needed to project the kind of robust picture of policy and its impact on the future energy system for Ireland. And that's kind of one of the key points and takeaways from our projections this year as well, is that the more detail we have on that, the more we can kind of build out that picture of what Ireland's energy system can potentially look like. So now just to talk a little bit about the scenarios that we review as part of the energy projections. So Ireland's projected future energy policy paths under the national energy projections look at two kind of key reported scenarios that align with the emissions projections that are reported to the EU by the EPA. The with existing measures, which essentially amounts to the estimated impact of policies and measures that are currently implemented, and the with additional measures scenario, which is the more ambitious scenario focused on the estimated impact of the delivery of measures that are in latest government plans, so not necessarily implemented yet, but including those measures that have a feasible delivery within the time horizon. And we also looked at the cap scenario. So that's kind of a variation on WAM, where we assume that the 2030 cap targets are met, and we can see the kind of the additional impact that might have towards meeting our targets. One of the key things then that we looked at this year in terms of these scenarios is we took a more critical look at the WAM kind of through the lens of that realistic chance of implementation during the timeframe to 2030. So this meant reviewing a lot of the assumptions that go into the projections across two dimensions of policy. So what's the maturity of the policies and measures that are currently in place? Are we still looking at targets, or are we looking at ground up projects? And can we see the aggregate impact of that? And the other dimension is the complexity of achieving that target. So that there's a lot of potential interlinkages. There's a lot of complications by sort of unproven technologies as well, or where there's a kind of long lead-in times. This can also contribute to the risk to our pace of progress. And the result of this is now that now in this projections results, the risk of delivery has been baked into the main reported policy scenarios, those WEM and WAM measures. So we can see a projected delay in the achievement of those targets and the impact that that has on our distance to meeting those obligations. So now if we look back at what Lee presented in terms of the kind of the key metrics for where we are at this point in time, nearing the end of the first carbon budget, at the midpoint of the decade where we have overall renewable energy share and final energy consumption targets that we need to meet. If we project that forward into the projections key insights, we can see that by 2030, we have the potential under the WEM and WAM scenarios to have a projected cumulative budget overshoot of 15 to 23%, and that's in the overall budget. In energy terms, we're looking at potential 13 to 17% if we were to kind of tot up all of the energy-related sectoral emission ceilings. We also have a projected RES of 27 to 33% by 2030, which is still quite a distance off that 43% target. And we only reach that target then in the following decade. And on the final energy consumption, we're projected to be 24 to 30% higher than that targeted amount under the Energy Efficiency Directive. And even by 2030, we don't yet reach that target for the reductions needed under the 2030 target. So though progress has been made across sectors to increase energy efficiency, add renewable energy, and reduce emissions, we aren't moving nearly fast enough, as Lee alluded to earlier, to meet our energy and climate goals by 2030. And the targets get tougher from here. For 2040, we have discussions around 2040 EU targets, as well as proposed carbon budgets going forward. So the Climate Action Plan targets call for large changes to our energy system, and the scale of those plan changes needs to increase, but also if everything in that plan was fully delivered, we'd still have a gap to bridge to meet our targets. So we really need to start looking at kind of how we can reframe the systems, the market and the energy system as a whole, and kind of look at systemic changes to get back on track. If we look in a little bit more detail on the renewable energy share, we can see here in this graph the projected progress to the EU target for the overall renewable energy share under the Renewable Energy Directive. And we can see that the challenge is in building out renewable capacity that outpaces additional demand on the system. So we can see the WEM scenario, the current implemented policy scenario in green, the planned or with additional measures, more ambitious scenario. It's the middle line there, and you can see the distance to the cap under current projections. So the cap being that top dark line. So we can see here again that we have quite a gap to meeting that 2030 target, and there's a need for additional kind of doubling down on that deployment to make that happen and to outpace demand. If we go now to the Energy Efficiency Directive and the final energy consumption projections, our projected progress to the EU target, which is the white dotted line there, we can see there is a very significant gap between our current energy consumption in Ireland and where we need to be by 2030. So once again, we're dealing with energy efficiency gains being outpaced by demand under the projection out to 2030. And this is a key area for us in terms of potential opportunity, because that demand, that consumption really underpins a lot of the targets and the goals that we're trying to meet. So one of the largest opportunity areas that we found from our projections this year that points to is energy consumption. So there's large-scale energy demand that's being added to our system. It makes the challenge that much more difficult for us to meet all of our targets. And we did have a kind of more gradual pathway to be able to meet those targets when they were first set, but delays have made that required path steeper. And new additions to demand at the moment are what's kind of heaping on top of that, that hill we need to climb, adding pressure to the system in terms of cost and energy security. So if we look at net reductions in overall energy consumption and identifying where there might be wasteful energy use that we can address to secure a more sustainable pathway, that is really a kind of key opportunity area for us. So if we look at this plot in particular, this kind of shows you that those opposing forces of the on the right hand side, the energy efficiency gains that we have in current and planned policy. And on the left-hand side, the large additions in terms of additional demand that make it more challenging to actually meet that target and actually see reductions in energy consumption. So if we put those together and we look at the emissions trajectory, so this is the annual emissions for the energy sectors and industrial processes. So this is a little bit different to the just the energy emissions as it's a combination of the kind of the relevant sectoral emission ceilings. We can see that the WEM represented in green again here and the WAM in blue, there's a more gradual pathway that's projected than what would have been necessary, which is that red dotted line, that necessary pace of progress. So the additional dotted line from 2025 there shows us a revised trajectory. So Ireland's energy transition targets really require that kind of unprecedented level of technology shifts combined with robust measures targeting energy consumption in order for us to maintain that path. And if we look at again that kind of pace of progress that we have to date, as Lee talked about, versus the pace that's necessary now to be able to catch up. And we can see there's a significant challenge ahead, but there is still opportunity in terms of that area of policy focused around consumption, around demand, that hasn't been as focused on as some of the technology pathways. And if we can get back on that pathway, we can see that there'll be the considerable benefits to society and from a more resilient energy system, and some of those consumption targeting the kind of the systemic approaches can provide a real kind of well of opportunity for us addressing the needs of people while taking climate action. So centering the local, boosting community projects, building consensus to reform systems and promote a more circular economy that can yield those benefits for the long run in terms of addressing the needs of society. And with that, I'll hand it over to Hannah Julian, who's going to talk more about the people.
Hannah, you're just muted
Sorry,
there.
yeah, I just noticed. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hannah Julian, and I lead the Behavioural Economics Unit here at SEAI. And I'm going to be talking about people, and in particular, data on people's behaviour that we gather through our Behavioural Energy and Travel Tracker, or BET for short. So the Behavioural Energy and Travel Tracker is a nationally representative survey that we've been running for 3 years now. We've been running it, we ran it every month in 2023, and we've been running it every 3 months in 2024 and 2025. And we started this survey during the energy crisis to get a detailed view of people's energy behaviours, everyday energy behaviours over time. And but BET is a little bit different to other tracking surveys in that it uses a technique from behavioural science known as the day reconstruction method to improve recall and accuracy. So instead of asking people what they usually do or how they usually use energy, which can easily result in recall or social desirability bias, we instead ask them to focus on one specific day, which is yesterday. So the first part of the day reconstruction method is a diary exercise where we get people to think through the previous day in stages and jot down what they did and how they used energy. So for example, if they were completing the survey today, which is a Wednesday, we'd ask them to think about what they did yesterday, which is Tuesday. And we asked them to do this even if it wasn't a typical day for them, because the idea is even if it isn't a typical day for them, on average across the whole population, we'll get a representative view of what's happening in the country as a whole. And we collect data over 7 days of the week for each wave, so we get a representative view. But we don't actually use this qualitative data for analysis. This is just to jog the memory of the participants. And it's then the second part of the day reconstruction method where we gather the data on behavior by asking them very detailed follow-up questions on their energy behaviors. So we ask them questions about their travel behavior and their home energy behavior, and in particular, behaviors around space heating, water heating, cooking appliances, and other larger electrical appliances. Those first two sections are what make up the day reconstruction methods and the behavior tracking, but we also ask some other questions that we think on factors that we think might be related to their behavior. So for example, we ask questions on factors on psychological factors and energy poverty indicators and sociodemographics. So as you can maybe imagine, BET generates a huge amount of data, and I could spend all day talking about it, but today I'm just going to give you a taste of what it can be used for, starting with a look at travel behavior. So we asked people completing the survey how many journeys they made on the previous day, and then we asked detailed follow-up questions about up to 4 of those journeys. And of course, what we're mainly interested in here is choice of mode of transport. And this is what the split has looked like over time. So fairly steadily, the vast majority of journeys are being made using motor transport, so 70%, and that's primarily the private car. Next up, accounting for about 20% of journeys, we have active travel, and that's mostly made up of walking. And then public transport is really accounting for quite a small proportion of journeys, less than 10%. But the big story here is the dominance of the private car, which I think we've heard about already from Lee. And we look at this a little bit more closely. So we ask people obviously what mode of transport they use, but we also ask questions about other features of the journey, such as distance. And from this, we can calculate the proportion of people who are using their car for short journeys in any given day. So first off, here's the proportion of people who are using their car for a journey under 2 kilometers in a given day. And that's about around about 15% of people using the car for these very, very short journeys. And remember, that's just in one given day. So if you're thinking about it more generally, that the proportion of people who are doing this at some point during the week is going to be higher. We also look at journeys under 5 kilometers, and as you expect, the proportion goes up. And at this stage, we're looking at about a third of people who are using their car for short journeys on any given day. We had seen what we hoped might look like a slight downward trend in these short car journeys up until recently, but we've seen a big uptick now in the latest wave in November. And you could make the argument, of course, that people just don't have an alternative, and of course that is the case sometimes. But to look at this a bit more, we've asked people for each of these short journeys that they made by car if they could have used another mode of transport. And what we see here is, if you look at the right bar first, if we look at public transport, it's really only quite a small proportion of these short journeys that people are saying that public transport is an option, and it's a practical option for them, about 10%. But if you look over to the left, in almost half of these short journeys made by car, people are saying they could have walked or cycled it instead. So there is, while we do need more alternatives, there are currently, alternatives for these short car journeys, and there's therefore a potential to reduce them and the emissions that go with them. So those were some of the travel results, and now I'm going to move on to talk about home energy use, and starting with heating behavior. So for heating, we asked people about, first of all, we just asked them what different types of heating they used on the reference day. And for each of the types of heating that they use, we asked them follow-up questions such as how long they use them for. And from this, then we can come up with kind of population estimates for the amount of time different types of heating are used for. So this is given the average for all homes in Ireland. So starting with central heating, we can see, of course, a clear seasonal trend here where there's a lot more heating used in the winter than the summer, as you'd expect, although important to note that, it doesn't go down to zero in the summer either. So some people still do use their central heating in the summer. And in the winter, we're looking at, on average, about 3 hours of central heating used per household per day. And we also look at secondary heating. So we look at the use of open fires and stoves and electric portable heaters and underfloor heating. The trends here are similar as with central heating. And of course, the amount of time for which these are used on average are lower, but not that much lower. So, secondary heating is accounting for quite a large proportion of it's meeting quite a large proportion of heating demand as measured by, the time for which heating is needed. And I'm not showing it here today, but we gather similar data for water heating as well. So the next thing we're going to look at is cooking. So we ask people how many meals they cooked on the reference day, and then we randomly choose one of these meals to ask about in more detail. And one of the things we're interested in here, of course, is what are the main cooking appliances people are using. So here are some of the big ones. So the hob is the most popular cooking appliance used for over half of meals. Oven a little less popular, just under half. Microwave a little less popular again, about 1 in 5 meals. And if you look closely, there are slight downward trends in some of these over time. And the likely reason for this is that we've seen an opposite trend in the use of air fryers over time. So we've seen a big rise in popularity of air fryers since we started the survey. And it's worth noting here maybe that, most of the behavior, we measure a lot of behaviors, most of them are extremely stable over time, other than the obvious seasonal trends, but this is one exception to that rule. So that this is one area where we have seen a change. So we collect data on lots of other electrical appliances as well, not just cooking appliances. I'm not going to show you all of them. I've just picked out a few examples here, picked out 3 as an example. So the most popular electrical appliances, you might say, the one that's used by the largest proportion of people in any given day is the TV, which is perhaps surprisingly used by even more people than a kettle in a given day. Then around the middle, we've got washing machine. So about half of people are using a washing machine in a given day. And then one of the less popular appliances that we ask about would be the dehumidifier. So generally under 10% of people, we see a slight seasonal trend there as well. But we don't just, I don't know what's happened there. We don't just ask about what appliances people use, but how they use them. So if I take the washing machine as an example, if people used a washing machine, we'll ask them about we'll randomly choose one instance of when they used the washing machine and ask them things such as what temperature setting they use. So for example, here, we could see that about half of people are using relatively high temperature settings when they're using the washing machine. We can also look, of those people who use the washing machine, we can look at who used a tumble dryer the same day, and we can see, that fluctuates slightly with more people using the tumble dryer in the winter. And yeah, roughly between 1/3 and 2/5 of people using the tumble dryer if they use the washing machine. And then we also ask about the timing of appliance use. And we're particularly interested here in whether people are using electrical appliances during the evening peak between 5 and 7 p.m. because we know that their demand tends to be increased during those hours, and that can put a strain on the grid and increase our reliance on fossil fuels. In the case of the washing machine, it's only about 10% of instances where it's used, where it's at peak. So it's maybe not the biggest contributor to the evening peak. So that's it for behavior. And what I'm going to do just before finishing up is quickly show you some examples of other factors we measure and how, that we think might be related to behaviors. So first here, I'm going to talk about the effort people say they're making and the level of effort they think others are making, starting with using sustainable transport. So first of all, here is people's self-reported effort to use sustainable transport. You can see they rate themselves as just slightly above the midpoint of the 7-point scale. And this fits with what we saw earlier with the short car journeys, that people themselves acknowledge that they're maybe not doing all they could to reduce their car use. Then when we ask them how much effort they think the average Irish person is making to use sustainable transport, the levels are a little bit lower, a little below the midpoint. And this means that people are, you know, their perceptions are wrong about other people, because on average, we would expect these two lines to be the same. So people are underestimating how much effort other people are making. If we look at effort to save energy at home, then people are rating themselves higher here. So people are, you know, making a concerted effort to save energy at home. But here the gap with their perception of other people is even larger. So people really are underestimating the effort being made by others to save energy. Another potentially important motivating factor for behavior is worry. And since we began the survey, we've been tracking worry about cost of living, climate change, and energy security. The highest levels of worry are for cost of living. These have remained very high throughout the 3 years, on an average rating of 6 out of 7. We had seen ever so slightly, you know, decreases over the last couple of years, but just again in the last wave there, we've seen an uptick again. So, you know, cost of living really is a very big worry for people. Next is worry about climate change, which is lower, but still, you know, still high, still well above the midpoint of the scale. And worry about energy security then, when we started the survey, was quite high, was around the same as climate change, but it has kind of been steadily decreasing over time as, I guess, the energy crisis has eased somewhat. So those were examples of some of the psychological variables we measure. And the last graph I'm going to show you is about energy poverty. So we track a number of different energy poverty indicators over time. So first off, we ask people how much they spent on energy in the past month, and we ask about their monthly income. And from this, we can calculate the proportion of people who are spending over 10% of their income on energy, which is a popular energy poverty indicator. And this is what we see. So we see that, you know, this indicator goes up and down with the seasons, as you'd expect, as people's bills are generally higher in the winter or just after. But we know there are issues with this 10% of income energy poverty indicator, because it excludes people who are cutting back so much on energy that they're underspending, and it also includes people who are maybe very well off and choose to use a lot of energy. So we also track some more subjective measures of energy poverty, such as the proportion of people who are having difficulty paying their energy bills, or the proportion of people who have been cutting back on heat or cutting back on other essentials in order to be able to afford their bills. And really, you know, what we can see with all the indicators is that, you know, things have been generally moving in the right direction, but energy poverty levels are still very high. And we see, again, a slight uptick in the latest wave, which matches what we saw with the worry about cost of living. So that's it from me. I've left a link here. I can, you know, put it in the chat as well afterwards. So if you're interested in learning more, you can find some publications using the BET data on our webpage. And we've also made the 2023 data available already if anyone, you know, has a use for it. And we'll be doing the same for 2024 and 2025 data very soon, early in the new year. And, you know, we'd really like the data to be used as a resource by anyone who wants to. So if you're interested at all, if you think it might be useful, do get in touch and we can have a chat. And with that, I'll hand over to my colleague, Mary Holland, who's going to talk about more resources from SEAI with regards data on prices.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And welcome to everybody here today. So my name is Mary Holland and I'm working on the energy statistics team. And today I'm going to talk about our energy price collection. So on the stats team, we're required to do a level of energy price reporting for Eurostat and the IEA to satisfy international reporting requirements. And we also have some older price collections going back to in the 90s. I was going to go through the price outputs that we have. So the one that goes back to the early 90s, this is our quarterly fuel cost comparison. We also collect electricity and gas prices under an EU regulation. We publish annual reports on this data. We also have various blogs that we publish every now and again. And all of this data is available to download on our website, and I'll give you the link at the end of this presentation. And there's actually been a lot of interest in our price data recently, and you'll have seen some recent media reports on prices. But first, I'm going to have a look at our electricity and gas price data that we collect under EU regulation. So before I go into the prices for electricity and gas, it's very important to be clear about what is actually being measured. And all of us were very familiar with the unit price of electricity and gas on our bills, but this is not an ideal measure of the true cost of energy. So in line with international best practice, we use the effective unit price of energy, the EUP. So the EUP includes the unit price, but also includes the standing charges, taxes, levies. It also includes direct price supports in our bills, and we're familiar with the number of account credits that were applied to household electricity bills from April 2022 until early this year for a total of €1,500, and these are captured in the EUP for households. Now, there were also business supports, but these were administered by revenue, so these are actually not captured in the EUP for businesses. So the effective unit price is essentially the revenue received divided by the energy delivered. And it sees through, any discounts, and in the case where some suppliers have low unit costs and high standing charges, or vice versa. So really, it's the truest measure of energy costs. And also just to note that our price data comes from surveys of energy suppliers. We don't have visibility of customer bills. So now I'll just move on to the actual prices. So first I'm going to look at our electricity and gas prices. So as I mentioned, collected under EU regulation. So it's biannual data collected in 6 monthly chunks. The regulation defines a number of consumption bands, but here I'm presenting a single weighted average for household electricity prices. And this data collection began in 2007, and the graph we have here looks at prices since 2010, with the bars showing the price per semester and the lines smoothing out systematic seasonal effects to present the 12-month average. And you can see there is a bit of a sawtooth effect here. And this is where in the second half of the year, there's actually lower consumption. So then the fixed costs like standing charges, levies, etc., form a larger proportion of the average price. This is the seasonal effect, and you can see it more in the household gas price and in household electricity. So it's going to go back to 2015 to early 2021, when prices were relatively flat and averaged about 23 cents per kilowatt hour. Prices began to rise after that. And just looking at this graph, it's just important, as I mentioned, the government credits are accounted for in these prices as it's a true cost to household electricity. And these came in the first half of 2022. Now, if we look at the most recent semester, the price was 31.7 cents per kilowatt hour. And comparing this to the earlier period, 2015 and 2021, it was still 37% higher than that earlier period. Now, the price collection that we do allows us to dig a little bit deeper into the price breakdown. So here we've broken down the electricity household prices by the base price, by the non-recoverable taxes and levies like the PSO, and it also shows the VAT. So there have been large increases in the base price, but we can also see the impact of the account credits, and these act as a negative price component and reduce the EUP. So in the first half of 2023, the account credits had the largest impact, and they were worth about 18 cents per kilowatt hour. So our next data collection, which will be run early next year, will be for July to December 2025, and that'll be the first collection without any price credits since 2021. This is a similar graph for household prices. Of course, the account credits were applied to electricity bills, not gas bills. And you can see there's more of a sawtooth effect here, for the seasonal effect. And again, if we look at the period 2015 to early 2021, the prices were around 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And we can see there that household household gas prices really started to increase in the second half of 2022. And in fact, between the first half of 2022 and the second half of 2023, they doubled. They have started to come back down after that. So in the first semester of 2025, prices were at 31.7 cents per kilowatt hour, but this is 80% higher than the earlier period of 2015 to early 2021. So far, I've been presenting on differences in time, but now we're going to have a look at differences in prices across the EU. So when comparing prices across countries, it is international best practice to use purchasing power parities. So we all know from our holidays that the same euro coin spends differently in Ireland than in Luxembourg than in Portugal. And when we compare international energy prices, straight euros can be a bit misleading. It is important to account for the ability to pay when comparing prices. So Eurostat used purchasing power parity to facilitate these comparisons, meaningful comparisons. So it's not just a GDP correction, it's a very robust methodology based on the cost of a basket of goods, and it is normalized and used to create an artificial currency unit, the purchasing power standard. And theoretically, one PPS can buy the same amount of goods and services in each country. So here we have a map of representative household electricity prices in EU countries. And a map like this is very useful when comparing the cost of electricity experienced by households. And by this measure, Ireland's residential electricity cost is in the upper quartile range. However, if we switch to the metric to PPP, to PPS, we can then start to compare the affordability of electricity to Irish homes. And by that measure, Ireland's electricity prices are more mid-table. Now, both metrics are correct and provide valuable insights. And it's important not to confuse the two, just to have an understanding of both metrics. And similarly, we can look at residential gas prices. In terms of cost, Ireland is in the upper part of the ranking, but in terms of PPS affordability, we are mid-table. So far I've been looking at residential prices, but business prices are important too. And again, these are collected under the EU regulation and defined, consumption bands are defined, but we're looking here at the weighted average. So key difference to residential prices is that residential prices come with hedging. Businesses, in particular large businesses, are closer to wholesale prices and more exposed to price shocks. They go up fast and they come down fast. We can see here after the increase, the sharp increase in electricity business prices started to come down in early 2023, when there was a slight increase in the recent semester, January to June 2025, of 6%. Similarly with gas prices, they also began to fall in 2023, but increased again in the most recent semester. So we can see there have been positive signs, but prices are still substantially higher than they were in the past. So far we've had a strong focus on electricity and gas prices as required under our EU regulations, but we also have prices on a number of other energy products. So as Lee showed earlier, over half of energy demand is for oil products, so it's important to have a look at these too. And these graphs look at road transport fuel price data for diesel and petrol. And now this is the price at the pumps and is dominated by underlying crude oil prices. There are a lot of other moving parts making up the price, including excise and carbon taxes and VAT. And we can see strong features common to both. Drop during COVID, peak coinciding with the invasion of the Ukraine, while prices have come down somewhat since then. This is my final graph, and this is for kerosene, for domestic heating oil. And this is the spot price at the start of each quarter as per our fuel cost comparisons. And the trend is similar to transport fuels, with the added effect of the weather. So just to summarize, what we've seen are significant price increases for electricity and gas and oil over the last few years. And although we are seeing signs of recovery, they're essentially higher across the board than pre-COVID. Now today I don't have time to talk about all our prices. You can see the link there on our website on all the prices presented today and some other price data available on fuels like wood and solid fuel. So that's it for me today. I'm going to kick over to Lee, who is presenting for Niall. Thanks all. That's
great, Mary. Thanks a lot. So like a bad penny, I keep turning up. So unfortunately, our GIS analyst, Niall Delaney, he can't be with us this morning. So I'm afraid you're stuck with me trying to muddle through his slides on data localization and the GIS mapping work that's going on in the energy statistics team. So GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, they allow SEAI to go beyond thinking of Ireland as a single monolithic block. It lets us bring much more nuance into our data and our insights. And essentially, we can use GIS to change the zoom setting on our energy statistics. For example, we can use GIS to look at the energy data from one of the 31 local authorities around the country instead of the national total. Or we can zoom in even further to one of the more than 19,000 small area divisions that are defined and used by the CSO to publish census data. So these CSO small areas, they're kind of in a statistical sweet spot. They provide relatively granular spatial data, typically on the order of 100 households, but they still preserve the confidentiality and the anonymity of individuals within that area. So the CSO is really, the CSO small areas, they're really like the cellular structure of Ireland's public data. They're kind of the smallest geographic unit that we can publish into the public domain while preserving confidentiality. And even then, we need to be very, very careful when we put those numbers out. And also in SEAI itself, internally, where we have protected data environments, we can actually zoom in even beyond the CSO small area level onto individual households. And that means we can help by trying to answer questions like, can clustering nearby home energy upgrades work to offer up an operational efficiency that might help SEAI roll out cheaper or more efficient or more speedy home energy upgrades? Essentially, the GIS work we're doing aims to provide continuity and cohesiveness in energy statistics across all 4 levels of granularity. We want to help inform discussion and debate on policy, planning, local action, and even family decisions if we can. We want to ensure that conversations at every level in Ireland speak to and with coherent, joined up data and insights, not just siloed data sets that are only relevant in a really narrow context. And you may not know it, but SEAI already has a really broad portfolio of spatial data on energy and energy infrastructure up on the web. At the national level, there's SEAI's Wind Atlas, which we're in the process of supplementing with new data layers that better visualize the maximum export capacity of our installed sites and the maximum export capacity of future contracted sites, as well as wind roses, which are neat data visualizations that help people understand the distribution of wind speed and wind direction when averaged over a year. So kind of useful for developers to have that information in their pocket. There's also our Solar Atlas, which shows irradiance levels of sunshine, and the locations of our big utility scale grid connected solar farms around the country. There's our bioenergy map, our geothermal potential map, which is based on GSI data, SEI's heat demand map, which will now include new breakdowns that will be included in the National Heating and Cooling Assessment that better visualize and quantify the spatial disaggregation of Ireland's heating demand. Ireland's hydroelectric capacity map, and SEI's BER map with data again on the small area level. So really like a wealth of spatially disaggregated data is already up there on the SEI websites, and we'd really welcome and invite you to visit them and interact with them. And I do want to point out that we've made some recent improvements to the BER map this year. And it's now possible to select and download data from specific areas, specific groups of these census small areas. So you can kind of click the areas you want and download small area aggregates and anonymized BER records for those areas in particular. So it's kind of like the equivalent of the BER research file in SEAI, but much more tailored to the individual areas that you yourself are interested in investigating. In terms of regional energy mapping, we have the Local Authority Climate Action Plan dashboard, and it's designed to support local authorities in building up their individual climate action plans and monitoring progress against those plans. The dashboard helps provide energy and energy grant data to the local authorities. So for example, if a local authority planner chooses the home upgrade layer on the top left-hand side here, which I've circled in pink, then they can understand how much SEAI investment has gone into their local authority and what types of SEAI grants are the most popular in their own local authority, but also in their neighbouring local authorities. And this might help show a planner, for example, if they're missing a trick, for example, if they're seeing that their neighbouring local authorities are being highly successful in bringing in funding through community grants, that might be a signal to them that they should try something similar. Similarly, if the local authority planner, hypothetical in this argument, chooses the domestic BER layer, they can understand the distribution and the count of the housing stock in the BER database in their area. And this can help provide them with insights on how many houses are near to or far from achieving a B2 rating, And again, that can better inform local authorities on their strategy for pursuing these upgrades. And going beyond regional statistics to community statistics, we're continuing to work on publishing SEAI grant data at the small area level. This map here shows the distribution of SEAI's Warmer Home Scheme grants around the Dublin area. And these Warmer Home Scheme grants are fully funded by SEAI and available to people in receipt of particular eligible social welfare payments. While this map, it shows the distribution of SEAI's Better Energy Home Upgrade grants, which are only partially funded. And a really key point here is that different grant types from SEAI, they service different parts of the community. But summed together, the portfolio of grants from SEAI can help support a just transition in a way that no single one grant could possibly do. Now, as I mentioned before, small area maps like this are the most granular level that we can publish data into the public domain. And even then, we need to be quite careful about it. So we're working very closely with the methodology division in the CSO, the Central Statistics Office, to ensure that we are following the best practice in data handling in the preparation of these small area maps. And once we're confident that we're following all the CSO suggestions and processes, we'll work to publish these small area grant maps up on the SEI website. But you don't need to wait for that until then to get kind of community level statistics. SEAI has already developed new dashboards that shape BER data for specific purposes. This is a screenshot of our relatively new Better Energy Homes dashboard, and it can be used to get estimated counts of houses and apartments that would likely benefit from roof insulation, cavity wall insulation, or might be considered heat pump ready. We also have another dashboard to support SEAI's Sustainable Energy Communities, or SECs. And this dashboard pulls and summarizes BER data on an SEC by SEC basis. And in this example, I'm going to choose Enniscorthy, but I could have chosen any one of the hundreds of SEAI sustainable energy communities out there. This shows the outline of the area covered by the Enniscorthy Sustainable Energy Community. It's looking well, and the dashboard can show the median BER rating of each small area in that sustainable community. You can also do things like showing the predominant building type of the dwellings, for example, apartments, detached, semi-Ds, mid-terrace, etc., as well as the predominant wall types, whether they're cavity, solid brick, etc., and even the thicknesses. And reviewing the data in a dashboard like this can help members and organizers of that sustainable energy community better understand in broad strokes the quality and the type of their housing stock. And this allows them to better plan what actions and upgrades might be best for them as a community. So really trying to put the information in the community's hands so the community can make the best decisions for them. Other community level maps we're working on include updating candidate area maps for district heating to build out a better picture of what the 2.7 terawatt hour per year looks like kind of for and from the district heating system across Ireland. And the updated candidate area maps include much more specific building level data from public buildings like hospitals and universities in this new iteration. And it can be used to enhance and supplement the data that's already in the small area estimates. It acts to better show hotspots, both sources and sinks, that will be well suited to a connection to a district heating network. So we can estimate really useful engineering parameters like the linear heat density, and even map that kind of the heating pipes that would follow the roads around the housing estates to kind of get close to a practical engineering solution. We can also look at the big kind of specific buildings on, say, for example, on a university or a hospital campus that could or should be connected, and again, use that to provide even more granularity and detail to inform the model of the candidate areas. And it's great to see that the results of these new models with these enhancements, they're matching reality. We see that the real world district heating scheme in Tallaght does substantially follow what our desktop analysis would suggest. And that really does give confidence that other candidate areas identified by our analysis are real world workable too. And here's a nice comparison of the outcomes from the district heating assessment model before and after that additional building level detail was added. And it's showing now that it's identifying new areas that were not flagged before. So again, I hope I've done Niall's slides justice today. If you have any questions on GIS or mapping, they're best directed to Niall rather than to me. He'll be, but please do feel free to reach out and he'll get back to you as soon as he can. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Emily for the next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Lee. I've just lost the slides there, Nicole.
Okay, can you see them? No?
I can't see them, no.
Okay, I'll, okay, try take
I
control
see
there.
them now.
Yep.
Take control. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Emily Byrne, and I'm an energy analyst on the energy statistics team. Mary and Lee have touched upon some of the price and GIS data that's available on the website, and Cahill has touched upon some of the monthly data. So I'm going to give you a very quick run through our publication portfolio timeline, some of the other pages and panels that you can find on the energy statistics section of the website, and I'll point you towards some key data and information which you might find useful. So every year, the Energy in Ireland report is published in mid-December, but it's far from the only substantial output from the stats team. In May of this year, and in every year, we publish the National Energy Balance. So that's the interim version of the National Energy Balance, followed by the first look note on energy supply and the security of supply in August, which is based on data from that interim balance. In September, then, we published the full National Energy Balance. And in October, we published a note on Ireland's electricity and gas prices in 2024, as well as a mid-year review of energy and energy-related emissions that are focused on the first half of 2025. And this mid-year review note summarises the monthly web updates on electricity, gas and oil, or EGO, made by the stats team to provide fast provisional insights on the monthly supplies of these energy products. And as Lee's also mentioned, the stats team also make about 50 updates per year to SEAI's mapping resources, ensuring that resources such as the Wind Atlas, BER map, Local Authority Climate Action Plan dashboard, and the Sustainable Energy Community Energy Master Plan dashboard offer the best available data. And finally, the Energy in Ireland report stands on the shoulders of these other updates throughout the year by providing a definitive data summary, which gives SEAI the opportunity to speak authoritatively to all that happened throughout the previous year, with several decades of long-term trends to add context. But the good news is that you don't need to wait for these reports to be published to have access to the latest data. To help us balance fast provisional data with authoritative documents, we also provide the most up-to-date data on demand through our monthly and annual data web pages and the Energy Data Portal. And you can also find the latest conversion and emission factors available on the conversion factors page as well. We're also aiming to expand the range of data on demand with new panels that will show estimates of final energy consumption, which I'm happy to announce has also made its way into the ESRI's quarterly economic commentary report, which is due to come out later this week. And from that then, also a direct link to energy-related emissions associated with the electricity and transport sectoral emission ceilings on a quarterly and monthly basis, which will be supplemental to the great work that's done by the EPA on their quarterly greenhouse gas indicator reports, which cover energy and non-energy related emissions across the economy. And if you're interested in the definitive annual data that's available in Energy in Ireland and in the National Energy Balance, it's summarised in a suite of interactive data panels split into 4 key sections of supply, transformation, demand and energy products on the annual data web page. And the data panels within each section are interactive and customisable. They have interactive tooltips which show detailed information when scrolled over with a cursor. We have the ability to zoom into years of interest. The views allow for customized energy product selection, either by selecting from the drop-down menu or directly selecting from the legend. And the units can be changed between kilotons of oil equivalent, terajoules and terawatt hours. Tooltips will automatically update with the new unit selection, and the data can be downloaded in the format that suits you using the download icon. The last thing that I'll leave you with is that the stats team have a blog section where you can read blogs written by members of the team. We typically use these to present insights drawn from the data and to complement our notes and reports with a quick read option, trying to keep their language lighter than what you might find in our reports, so they can be a great introduction to topics for less technical readers too. And we've published a number of blogs this year on topics like GIS, energy supply and security of supply, sustainable energy, sustainable transport journeys, for example. But we have the last blog of the year coming out today. It's already published actually, and I'm happy to have authored that. It will focus on how we can view direct and indirect emissions from end-use sectoral demand in terms of CO2 equivalent in the context of the national energy balance. So if you have the time and you're interested, you can head over to our blog page to give it and the others a read. And with that, then I'll hand you over to Joel.
Thanks, Emily. I'm just going to see how this goes for myself. Still see it. Great. So just going, good morning, everyone. I'm Joel Franklin, Program Manager for Energy Policy and Program Evaluation at SEAI. And I know it's the end of a long set of talks, so I'll be fairly brief. I won't be showing any energy data today, but I will be providing some signposts to some existing and upcoming energy data resources. Just going to advance forward here a bit. So while today we've seen a wealth of national energy statistics produced by SEAI, we also recognize that in order to contribute to Ireland's energy transition, we require evidence spread across many different organizations, as well as across different parts of SEAI ourselves. Aside from the national disaggregated statistics you've seen today, SEAI also gathers and maintains data related to the many programs that we run in supporting households and businesses to transform their energy use. Some examples are building and characteristics and energy performance from the BER Building Energy Rated database, works carried out in SEAI's home energy upgrade schemes, energy monitoring and reporting data in our public sector programs, and the number and characteristics of electric vehicles purchased through our EV grants. We're increasingly using these various data sets to draw insights on the impacts of our programs and how they contribute to moving the dial on Ireland's national energy consumption. We're also working with other organizations to access certain kinds of data on energy consumption and to report on the impacts of Ireland's many energy-related policies, and to make data available to others looking to examine policy impacts and to carry out their own research on Ireland's energy consumption. Just to give two examples, we have been working closely very recently in recent years with the CSO, the Central Statistics Office, to contribute ideas to improving their statistical reporting, as well as to identifying new kinds of data products that could help Ireland find the most effective ways to fulfill its climate commitments. In this case, by linking together data from SEAI as well as from ESB Networks, from Gas Networks Ireland, as well as from the CSO's own census of population, the CSO is producing new research data that can help identify the most effective energy efficiency measures for homes and to quantify the impacts of heat pumps when deployed at large scale. The CSO will restrict access to these data sets to registered research organizations in Ireland, but the CSO will also use linked research data sets like these to make high-level summary data available to the general public. In the future, we hope that our own grant programs' accumulated data can also be integrated into these future CSO data products and yield even more useful insights. The other example I want to mention is where SEAI is one of 29 core members of the EU-funded Odyssey Mura project, which has been running for nearly 30 years and has made two databases available to the general public that can help inform future energy saving and decarbonization policies. Firstly, the Odyssey database compiles national energy data and indicators across all EU member states, providing an essential benchmark for each country's energy trajectory. And secondly, the Mirror database assembles energy efficiency policies from across those same member states, providing a priceless resource to policymakers across Europe looking to find new, more effective ways of accelerating their own energy transitions. SEAI contributes to the project by regularly submitting data on Irish energy statistics and on energy policies and their impacts. And next year we'll be welcoming the partners in the project to Ireland for the project's annual meeting. With that, I'll hand the mic back to Jim to lead off the question and answer session.
Thanks very much, Joel. And thanks to all of the speakers this morning. I think you'll agree there's been a lot of work going on in the background here in SEAI to bring you these insights today. And I will mention that much of the data, particularly for 2024, was only available to the team for the last few weeks. So a serious effort to bring you all of those insights. Also very happy to say we've maintained a significant number of people on the call, well over 200 still.